our opening clip, because we've been opening our shows with some archived clips lately, that was from a show a couple of years ago that we did paying tribute to Gone with the Wind as our Inside the Classic series, and our guest for that show was Molly Haskell, who is an extremely celebrated film critic and author, and a longtime wife, and as of today, the widow of another terrifically celebrated film critic, Andrew Sarris. And I wanted to open up the show talking about the legacy and the contribution of Mr. Sarris to film criticism and film culture as a whole. And to do that, I wanted to bring on our great friend, Mr. Keith Uhlich, critic for Time Out New York. Keith, are you there, buddy?
Yes. Hi, how are you?
You are here. I really appreciate you joining us tonight, especially on such short notice. But you're such an essential voice on the show, and I really wanted your contribution to this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So, the articles are appearing now, the kind of tributes to Mr. Sarris, and I saw in the New Yorker, someone wrote in the New Yorker, Andrew Sarris is the one indispensable American film critic, and this was obviously the magazine for which Pauline Kael wrote. Right. And Roger Ebert said he was the most influential American film critic of his time and one of the jolliest. Do you agree with those assessments?
Yes, to a degree, although as I'm hearing all that, when someone passes away, obviously the voices tend to be really hyperbolically praising, and I met Sarris and I interviewed him. I had the good fortune to do that in 2001, and what I found, and I said that in my introduction at the time, was that he was very modest. So I kind of am hearing all these praiseworthy words, and it's just like I'm kind of wondering if he might scoff a little bit at it and just kind of go, let's get back to the movie already. Because I was just picking up his book, The American Cinema. I was flipping through it, kind of in a quick preparation, and I saw a line here that just struck me, where he said this book is intended for those perennial cinephiles, the solitary moviegoers. And the solitary moviegoers, I just feel like what he meant by that in some ways is the individual, and the individual perspective, and that this was not necessarily, unlike Kael, I think, who did foster acolytes in her own way, for ill, for worse. This is not really, I'm not trying to blame her for anything here, but I think why I tend to gravitate towards Sarris is he spoke to me more as an individual. It wasn't like you must agree with all my positions. Rather, you can use my positions as a sounding board to make up your own mind.
Right.
And that's what, I try to emulate in my own work. Not to have people parrot my opinions, but perhaps to use the opinions that I have.
Excuse me, Keith.
Yeah.
You just probably summed up probably the most important thing that's missing from civil discourse in anything. I'm not being, not to go on a hyperbole or anything, but someone who has been yourself, who's been in a position for taking an unpopular stance on a popular film, right. I think you've just summed up, what is probably the most important thing. It's something that we've seen just obliterated in the last 10, 15 years, maybe even longer than that. It isn't that it's not the art of agreeing. Forget that. It's to say, okay, use this as a point of reference.
Yeah.
You may disagree or agree, neither is wrong, but you really just sort of summed up what's missing. You just summed up the heart of civil discourse in our society that's sadly lacking.
Well, film criticism, to me, film criticism has never been about, consensus about, the worth of a film or whatever. It's also never been necessarily about reading somebody's opinion and deciding whether to go and see the movie or not. For me, film criticism lives as an art unto itself, and what's most important about it is very simply whether you enjoy reading the person, their writing. That's what it's about.
It's the key thing is their writing. Just as you would any journalist or any writer for that matter. I think that's the problem. I hate to say it, but I think, and I'm definitely guilty of this, but I think in the last decade with the internet especially, I think we fostered either this you're with us or against us kind of atmosphere that exists on here, and not on our show per se, but definitely in the message boards across the internet, on the tubes. Yeah. And I have really in the last 3 years just gutted all that. I don't go to any websites anymore, really. I go to IMDb to check the news, and that's about it. I've lost all interest in interacting with on Twitter or anything like that, just because I find it so it's poisonous in one way. It's too nice or it's too mean.
Well, I didn't get and back to Sarris. I mean, I didn't get that feeling about him. I mean, I listened to a lengthy hour-long interview.
Right.
We'll play a clip from it. I listened to it earlier tonight, and he did seem very jovial, very fair and balanced.
Right.
In his thinking and his articulation about movies. When did you first? When were you first turned on to Sarris, Keith?
I actually, there's an essay that I wrote. There were several I wrote for Senses of Cinema that kind of went with that interview back in 2001. And as memory serves, and I should have read it again before talking with you guys, but I'm pretty sure what it was Godfrey Cheshire, who was a fellow film critic who I also really loved at the time, was a big influence on me, wrote for the New York Press. We became friendly, and we went into a bookstore one day, and he pointed out the American Cinema. And that's Andrew Sarris's, famous book with all the directors and that I just read the little quote from, and it has, the categories like Far Side of Paradise and Pantheon directors and all that. And he pointed it and said, every cinema must have this book in their library. And I remember at the time being a little skeptical. I think probably because I had read something, and I don't remember what it was, where Sarris had panned something probably that I liked. And I mean, to this day, that kind of thing has prevented me from taking David Thompson seriously. But David Thompson is just easy not to take seriously nowadays. But Sarris, I mean, dig a little deeper into his work, and you see the variety of opinion and the what I would say, another thing I try to emulate, the constant curiosity that he had for wherever he was and for whatever was in front of him. I mean, he was not one that I saw necessarily to write, a piece like Hale wrote, "Why are the movies so bad?" after she came back from California. He was more about, I think, being where he was and reacting to the films that were around him. And I think he did mellow a little bit as he got older. I know there were some medical issues around 88 or 89. But he was, like in 2001, he was extremely sharp. He expressed a great fondness for Julia Stiles, which tickled me to no end. And of course, he wrote one of his greatest reviews, I think, actually, at that point, in defense of AI, the Spielberg movie, which he absolutely loved. And he was not a science fiction fantasy fan, but he saw something. He saw the fable-like aspects of that film, and that appealed to him. And he was one of the major voices coming out in defense of the film at the time when it was kind of being vilified in a lot of circles. So, that was great to see.
Well,
and go on.
And he also, I mean, he wasn't afraid to go back and reassess filmmakers that he might have missed the boat on at first. And I think he did that with Billy Wilder, was one of the highest profile filmmakers he did that with. Just to give a little history on him, I mean, as far as I know, I think in the 50s he spent a lot of time in Paris. And when he came back to the States, he kind of adopted the notion that was going around the filmmaking community there at the time of the Auteur Theory. He kind of introduced that to the American lexicon. And the Auteur Theory essentially states that the director is the ultimate author of a film. And that's kind of a sense that has stayed with us. I mean, it's part of the way we view films now as a whole, isn't it?
Indeed, and I think when we get into the nitty-gritty and the specifics of it, I always feel like I'm kind of misdescribing the Auteur Theory. So I kind of want to proceed a little cautiously here, because I think what it meant in Paris is not necessarily what it meant when he brought it here, in the sense that I think he, it's sort of like you translate something, from one language to another. I think a lot of what you're talking about is essentially what it is, about the director as the ultimate author. But I think that there were some cultural things also. And God, my French is going to sound awful here. The Les Politiques d'Auteur, or whatever, which is the French version. I think it was probably a terrible accent, and I'm sure I'm going to get criticized for that, but whatever. And then the Auteur Theory, as it came to be known, here through his kind of translation of it. And certainly, yes, I mean, at the very basic level, I think we can say that yes, it is very director focused. And certainly that's a good thing. And again, though, I think, obviously your creation grows away from you, and so maybe he actually did have kind of a Kale-like effect, only in the sense that a lot of people kind of now take that basic little nugget of the Auteur Theory and blow it up into kind of the only thing. It's like, and I think, with him, he even says, even in looking in the book, there's no one unified theory of film, of how to look at a movie. And so I don't think he would say, he would be strong in his opinions, but I don't think he would say that this is the be-all, end-all. Right. And I guess one of the unfortunate things maybe is that, but I mean, how can you help it? It's just that a lot of people take auteurism as the be-all, end-all of something, and that does the disservice sometimes to like screenwriters, cinematographers, actors, just the general collaborative nature of filmmaking. So,
right.
I think he would say, obviously you have to take a lot of theories and make your own truth out of it. I mean, that's what I try to do. But he certainly, he made his own truth out of it. And I think, unlike Kale, from my dealings, with her just as a reader, never met her personally, I don't think Sarris pushed himself, or pushed people to accept his perspective as much as she did.
Right.
And it's, again, I feel like I might be, there are people I know who knew Pauline Kael very well, and I'm not trying to denigrate her contribution either. They're two very titanic voices. But I gravitated more towards Sarris because I felt that there was a bit more generosity in that perspective. And, that's what I try to emulate in my own work.
Do you feel, I got a question for you, do you feel like it was that essential difference between the two that led to their kind of famed rivalry?
Rivalry, yeah.
I mean, I'm not really certain. I know, I was reading another thing today. My friend Kevin Lee had the good fortune of having a lunch with Andrew Sarris and Molly Haskell, with a whole group of people at the Museum of the Moving Image, I think in 2008, and I believe it was at that lunch that he basically, kind of tried to shoot down the kind of romanticization of film criticism in the 60s when Kael and he were practicing. I think probably he was very much a journalism man, old school journalist in the sense of it's a paycheck, it's
right,
a daily grind kind of thing. And out of that can come really wonderful stuff. But I mean, I can feel, I sort of have a journalism feel, in my own work and stuff, just in terms of like the schedule and everything, and just the sense of what a newsroom is, as endangered as that may be in some ways, Time Out does still foster that kind of atmosphere. And it's a job. It's a job. There's nothing really to romanticize about it. It's day to day, and I love doing it, and I think he loved doing it. But I don't think that when people talk about like him and Kael going at each other, and his great line about John Simon, where he said he was the greatest critic of the 19th century. I mean that's great, and it makes for good copy and everything. You kind of look back at that and like, wow, but. I think it's important too, and I think what he was trying to steer people towards when he was saying that in 2008 is to not lionize so much that you're just constantly longing for the past rather than concentrating on where you are. And
I did get that sense, but everything that's being written about Mr. Sarris for the most part, I mean, you can't avoid the Cale Sarris kind of legacy and the feud, as imaginary as that might have been. However,
it wasn't imaginary. I mean, don't mistake me there. Yeah, I mean,
well,
it was very
imaginary in the aspect, at least from a public perspective, that Cale only wrote like one thing once about referencing
circles
him.
and squares.
Yeah. But you know, I read tonight. I read a kind of a quasi obituary that Sarris wrote about Pauline Kael. And he kind of detailed every kind of encounter he had with her from the very beginning. And there was definitely no love lost.
No, yes. And, they did not see eye to eye. And I guess, you know, I also use that as kind of an instructive thing for me, because I don't really like that. I don't like that people who have such differing opinions can't get along. I mean, I know that, you know, not being naive, there are just some people in this world that we cannot mix with for whatever reason. It just, you know, it doesn't work. And you know, you can dime store psychoanalyze all you want, but I mean, you know, they didn't get along is the whole thing of it, and a lot of that came out of their differing perspectives and approaches to film. At the same time, you know, I think again, a lot of people took that as, you know, now we have to divide ourselves into camps, and I hate you, and I hate you, and it's just like, and it's just like that's not good for criticism. It's like we need to be together in the same room, and we can argue about our opinions if we so wish, but at a certain point, you know, hopefully we can accept each other as people, you know, and I guess love each other, you know, as people too. And I mean, that's what I take away from a lot of these feuds. First off is that I think probably they are in some ways blown out of proportion just to kind of mythologize them. But at the same time, there's some very real truth in you know, in the antagonism. And I just try to say, well, let's argue our points of view with each other, but let's, best we can, you know, not let the antagonism so divide us that we can't be with each other, you know, because I think if film criticism is going to survive, you know, the troubles that it's in, I think it has to be through building a community, a strong community of not the same voice, not voices parroting each other, but of voices, you know, strong voices expressing a very informed, impassioned perspective on film and on movies and on, you know, ad infinitum, because I don't think, you know, the moving picture art is going anywhere anytime soon.
No.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic though, because it works as kind of a double-edged sword in terms of Cale Sarris. I mean, they were the two most influential critics at that same period of time.
And Manny Farber was the Holy Ghost, maybe.
Right. And you know, he I saw that For the Love of Movies, which is a documentary on film criticism, and I believe Sarris in that film actually said something to the effect, I mean, it isn't verbatim, but he essentially said, you know, and to a large extent, we made one another, you know.
Right.
Which is kind of an irony, and you see it in the obituaries for Mr. Sarris that his name is always somehow linked with Pauline Kael.
Yeah, but that's the media, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the myth, and there's truth in the myth, but I hope that you know, we can get to a place where we see him as a person, you know, and in all his complexity, and. Yeah, you're going to ask something?
Well, you mentioned AI as being a particular favorite piece of writing from him. I think it's the first review he ever wrote. Was it for The Voice, The Village Voice, was it? I think it was Psycho in 1960.
First review for The Village Voice. I think he had written other things before then. I'm a little confused as to you know, exactly when he started. I know it was before. I think it was before Psycho. I think it was just that his first Village Voice review was Psycho.
But he came out swinging with that review because essentially, I mean, I remember Bosley Crowther. he panned the film, and then and then Sarris came out and said this is one of the great avant-garde films. Just an absolute rave, like kind of an infamous review that had lasting power. What other reviews of his do you particularly cherish?
Yeah, I mean, I have Confessions of a Cultist here, which collects his work. Actually, and here we go, 1955. So there's an essay in here from 1955. So I mean, he was reviewing things even before Psycho. Psycho was just what he had in The Voice, I believe, for the first time. But I mean, his thoughts on the birds, anything on Hitchcock, he's really incredible on. I love that he loved. I'm trying to see. Yeah, I mean, like. Really, it's like the Hitchcock ones that they get. Oh, Seven Women. I'm sorry, that's what I was looking for. John Ford's Seven Women, which was John Ford's last movie, really heavily panned, and he championed it. As a movie that he says it's a genuinely great film from the opening credit sequence. I mean, and nobody was, nobody I think in the big papers at the time was saying that. They were saying it was John Ford having lost, any touch of anything, and Sarris was seeing, poetry and beauty here, where in what was ostensibly just, a bunch of women trapped in a Mongolian monastery, and he was absolutely right. I don't know if you guys have seen the film. Have you?
No, I haven't. No.
I've never seen it. Never had a chance to.
Yeah, it's an incredible final film because it was the last feature that Ford made, and it's basically it just has all these undercurrent. It has this undercurrent of lesbianism in it. It's fascinating, coming from Ford, Mr. American macho in so many ways, and it's. It has Anne Bancroft basically playing a John Wayne role in it, in a role that I think was originally going to be cast with John Wayne, and then they made it into like a mannish Anne Bancroft doing it, and so it has these. It's an amazing bridge film, I'd say, between kind of old Hollywood and the newer Hollywood that was taking more chances and that was coming up in the 60s and the 70s in the American cinema. It was it's an incredible film, and the fact that he defended it, it made me want to see it forever. And I would also say another thing, if ever anyone can get a hold of his monograph on Joseph von Sternberg that he wrote for the Museum of Modern Art, I actually, that was one of my interactions with him, was I wanted to read his monograph, which was out of print, and I called him and asked him if I could borrow his copy so I could make a copy. And so I went over to his apartment and I got his his copy of it, and he handed it to me. He's like, "Oh, please don't lose it, please." And I was like, "I promise I won't. I'll bring it right back." And I took it home and I made a full copy of it, and I have the pages like right here in front of me. They're getting a little bent and I guess yellowed and dusty now, and but his insights into von Sternberg were something too, and that really got me into looking at his work.
There was another thing that distinguished Andrew Sarris, and I think he was definitely the critic that popularized this practice. He would come out front every year and come out with his top 10 list of favorite films, and that's become a popular practice now. I know
some bastardized practice, but
but he saw it as a means, as I understand it from reading about him, as a means to just be completely forward and supportive of the works that meant the most to him throughout the year.
Indeed. Yeah. Not blaming him. It's like again, it's fascinating to look at like the critics of the past, and they do these wonderful things, and then people take these wonderful things, and the further they get away from the person who created it, the more they become kind of like a corporatized thing, to the point that now everybody, myself included, is making lists because they drive traffic. And I'm not just talking top 10 lists, but like top 100s, top 50s, and everything. Not saying it's necessarily all terrible, but he was using it in a very personal and pointed way, I think. And I don't. It's kind of like a colleague of mine wrote an essay on Spielberg's Jaws recently that really just pinpointed something that kind of blew my mind, where he basically said that Spielberg created a genre that only he can work in, and yet that hasn't stopped people from it essentially becoming the dominant mode in Hollywood. You know, and I feel like in some ways you could apply that to a lot of critics. It's like critics, Sarris created something that, is so influential, as did Cale, but strangely it's like only they could work in it to, the highest, and yet here we are kind of, not quite living up to it, at our best, I'd say, and it's almost like you need some new individual to come along and create something that we can't even yet conceive of, and
right.
I don't know what that would be or how, but I can't help but think that that has to be the next step in some way.
Well, I love the movies that he championed, and actually they're all listed, all of the history of his kind of top 10-year list. They're listed on our website. Maybe we'll go through them later on in the show after our other interviews. But there was a movie that caught my eye that really didn't get much critical praise, and it's a movie that you and I both adore, Empire of the Sun. That was on his top 10 list for 87, I guess it was. So automatically I saw that and I said, "Oh, I like this guy."
Yeah. No, me too.
Yeah, but do you find, and I'll end it with this, in terms of legacy and what distinguished him from the majority of film criticism that we see today, do you find that there's kind of a cynicism that runs through criticism today, as though a lot of people that write about film are more in love with the idea of being critical than they are of actual movies?
It's interesting. I'd say this. It's almost like when you got someone like Gene Siskel, who fell into criticism from, I think, a real estate beat, if I'm not mistaken. I think there was a generation of critics around, that were after Sarris but before the generation coming up now, who kind of fell into, a critical profession. And, ultimately, I think made something of a go at it, but they were newspapermen in a way. And now it's kind of like, the cynicism seems to spring from, you were talking about, I think, Jerry, you were saying something about the Internet.
Yeah.
And how it, and the discourse and how it cheapens discourse. And, I mean, my thought is that I think these trolls, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I don't know what else. There's no euphemism for it. That's it.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Who are basically, poisoning the discourse in some ways, or attempting to. Let's not even give them the
I'll
ability
give you
to
that.
poison us.
I'll give you that.
Let's not even give them the ability to poison us. Let's just say they are attempting to. I kind of think that these people have always been there. In the past, they wrote letters to the editor. Now they write comments, and the unfortunate thing is, and now
you're absolutely right.
The unfortunate thing is that there was a nice lag time between the publication of a review and a letter to the editor. Now you can post your review and within a second get a commenter from Rotten Tomatoes calling you fag. So
no, you're right, Keith.
And it's like, like for me right now, my review of Brave, which I was not a fan of, has already garnered some comments on the website, on the Time Out website, calling me names and not really dealing with any of the substance of the piece. And like you say, I if the cynicism grows out of anything, unfortunately, I think it's not the trolls. I think it's just, it's us subjecting ourselves, we who love doing the writing,
letting it get to you.
Yeah, exactly. Subjecting ourselves to that and allowing it to poison you, or poison ourselves. And I just feel like I don't think, but at the same time, I don't want to be someone who says we must avoid or not go to certain sites. But I do think we need to learn what blocks to put on, like where not to go. For me, I'm getting to a point where once I've written a piece, I leave it as is, and I accept that people are going to react to it. But I don't really want to participate in a digital discussion of it. If someone would like to, write me an email or talk to me, like if we were, if you all wanted to talk about a review of mine or something on the show, I mean that's different because then we're having a dialogue and there's an assumed, there's some kind of general decorum, I think, that goes with that.
Right.
So I just think the cynicism. I think the potential for cynicism was always there. The thing of it is it's just become more amplified now because the internet is an amplifier. Yeah. It amplifies the voices of the things. I don't even necessarily know if they're people because they could all be one, terrible, evil little child in a basement somewhere, or not even a basement. Maybe he's a very happy child, except when he gets on the
outhouse in the backyard.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't know. It's like you can see all these comments and you can just like amplify in your own mind the whole world is against me. But the internet is not the whole world.
Thank God.
Not. It's a very minor part of the world.
Thank you.
And it's just like and I just to bring it back to Sarris because I think we should really end with him. That's why he will last, I think, is he was such a strong individual voice to the point that he didn't even need to argue, with any trolls or whatever. He said his piece. He said it intelligently. He said it passionately, and he maintained that curiosity that he had about the art that he committed himself to till the end of his days. And that's what I want to emulate, and that's what I hope more people emulate, because that is what I see is missing a lot. People just focus on the on what the trolls are throwing at them, and essentially then I think go down to that level. And we need to rise above that. We need to be better than that. I think that Sarris was better than that, and I think that contribute. I just hope I can, live up to his example in that way.
That's well said.
You're definitely on the right. I mean, you've definitely been doing that as long as I've known you. So.
Well, I don't know if an artist is necessarily the best judge of his own work. So.
I'm just saying my own observation. Yeah. But if I can throw it back and just ask a very important question.
Yeah.
When did, and this goes back obviously long before any of us were online or anything, but when did it become so important to have this consensus in someone's favor? Why is that so important? We want people to agree with us on our opinions. When did that become important?
Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, and again, it's kind of like Rotten Tomatoes is great to a degree because it collects everybody in one place.
Right.
So, you can click on certain reviews or just get a sense, oh, Mike D'Angelo didn't like that. Oh, Stephanie Zaharek liked that. Oh, Andrew O'Hara liked that. It's like you can just use it as like, oh, now I know this person didn't like it. Let me go see what they have to say in more depth. Unfortunately, the rotten and the red tomato and thing, and then I guess to a degree, thumbs up and thumbs down as well. Star ratings, they all kind of built upon each other, and they're not necessarily bad things in and of themselves. It's just, again, the thumbs up, thumbs down worked for Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert. Unfortunately, so many other people decided to take it as their own thing and bastardize it. And, too many people take these things that work in a specific context. I think this is like someone like Bill Watterson never wanted Calvin and Hobbes to be animated because he said it would rob the strip of its soul. So it's kind of like but so many people take these things that really only work in one context, and then it gets bastardized and it kind of poisons, what was good about the other thing. And hopefully, all you can hope in that case, I mean, when you lose control of your creation, is that you can still maintain the integrity that came with that. That came with the shorthand, I guess. Because, I mean, the star ratings, the thumbs up, thumbs down, they're shorthand. They're shorthand to say, I like this, I didn't like it. And, that's fine to a degree, but you got to go more in depth. This behooves the critics, this behooves the viewers, this behooves, every human on this earth. We should strive always to go more in depth on things, to be critical thinkers about things. And unfortunately, it's just much easier for people to say thumbs up, thumbs down, and that's it, and leave it at that.
And then look at and then they look at the percentile, 78%, fresh as opposed to, whatever. It's all like a numbers game. I always kind of like it, all that stuff.
It's like consumer reports, unfortunately, and that's
I kind of like it
I think, at the end of the day.
Well, I kind of liken it to like sports fans, like saying, well, this year so and so is batting, this average, but last year he batted this average, that kind of thing. And it's that same kind of. I think movies kind of engender, music can too. That same sort of fandom, where it's like, okay, I'm on this movie's team, I'm on this director's team, I'm on this studio's team, and I want them to win, and the numbers don't lie, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, but you're not looking, as Keith is saying, you're not looking into the details.
Yeah, the details are very important.
It should be pointed out, too, I think, that Sarris actually, his method was inspired by his love of sports, I believe. He was using a kind of sports judging system in the American cinema, and that was radical and new at the time, to kind of group people like that, and very helpful. But again, I think the reason it worked for him was because he was not positing it as the be-all, end-all, just a way. I'd like to see more people get back to saying this is a way to look at something. Not the way.
Exactly.
A way.
Right.
And so, that's it, I guess.
Keith, my friend, thank you so much. And you are actually going to join us again in a couple of weeks when we do our Summer of '87 roundtable, tentatively scheduled for us for July 18th, which I think is a Wednesday. But you guys will start running 80s pieces on the House Next Door second week of July, or?
The deadline that I've given people is July 9th for articles, and then I believe I'm going to get a nice, healthy supply that I can then sort of parcel out either on a daily, every other day, whatever. We'll see how much I get, and
awesome.
We'll just go with that. Yeah, for the rest of the summer.
And we'll certainly push that series. And actually, I mean, that's one of our favorite shows every year, so it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it should be.
I can't wait to talk to you about Over the Top.
Oh, Jesus Christ.